3 men were killed in a car crash on their way to a conference. They arrived at the pearly gates, and St. Peter met the first man and said, "You lived a good life, were honest in your dealings, generous to others. I will go get you your reward." He returned in a few minutes with a drop-dead beautiful woman and announced, "This is your eternal reward." St. Peter then turned to the next man and said, "You were a wicked, cheating, no good man. I'll be back with your reward." He returned a few minutes later with a nasty woman, half her hair missing, only a few rotting teeth, and announced, "This is your eternal reward." The final man anxiously looked to St. Peter, who only shook his head at him and said, "I'll be back." He returned with an even more beautiful woman than the first. The man exclaimed, "Wow, was I really that righteous?" St. Peter then turned to the woman while pointing to the man and said to her, "And here is your eternal reward." A man riding in a taxi needed to speak to the driver, so he leaned forward and tapped the man on the shoulder. The driver screamed, almost leaped out of his seat, and ran the car up on the curb, coming to a stop only after running into a lamppost. Fortunately, neither the cabbie nor the passenger was injured. The passenger apologized, saying, "I never thought you'd react like that to a little tap on the shoulder." The cabbie said, "It's not your fault, sir. Today is my first day as a cab driver. For the last 25 years, I've been driving a hearse." 2 elderly ladies had been friends for many decades. Over the years, they had shared all kinds of activities and adventures. Lately, their activities had been limited to meeting a few times a week to play cards. One day, they were playing and one looked at the other and said, "Don't get mad at me. I know we've been friends for a long time, but I'm afraid I've forgotten your name. Please tell me what it is." The other woman sat silently and stared at her for at least 3 minutes. Finally, she said, "How soon do you need to know?" A man was on trial for murder and decided to take the stand in his own defense. During cross-examination, the prosecutor asked, "Did you murder the deceased?" The man replied, "No, sir, I did not." The prosecutor said, "Do you know the penalty for perjury?" The man replied, "Yes, I do, and it's a lot less than the penalty for murder." Mullah Nasruddin was sitting in a tea shop when a friend came excitedly to speak with him. "I'm about to get married, Mullah," his friend stated, "and I'm very excited." "Mullah, have you ever thought of marriage yourself?" Nasruddin replied, "I did think of getting married. In my youth, in fact, I very much wanted to do so. I waited to find for myself the perfect wife. I traveled looking for her, first to Damascus. There I met a beautiful woman who was gracious, kind, and deeply spiritual, but she had no worldly knowledge. I traveled further and went to Isfahan. There I met a woman who is both spiritual and worldly, beautiful in many ways, but we did not communicate well. Finally, I went to Cairo, and there, after much searching, I found her. She was spiritually deep, graceful, and beautiful in every respect, at home in the world and at home in the realms beyond it. I felt I had found the perfect wife." His friend questioned further, "Then did you not marry her, Mullah?" "Alas," said Nasruddin as he shook his head, "she was, unfortunately, waiting for the perfect husband." A man and his son leave the farm for the first time and end up at a very large shopping mall. Astounded by everything there, father and son walk up to an elevator not knowing what it is. As they watch, an elderly lady in a wheelchair rolls up to the elevator, goes inside, and presses a button, causing the silver doors to close. Father and son watch as the doors slide shut. Numbers above the doors begin flashing in ascending order, and then in descending order. Finally, a bell rings. The doors slide open and out walks a beautiful young woman. The little boy says to his father, "Dad, what kind of machine is that?" The father replies, "I don't know, son, but go get your mother." A lawyer pulled up to a parking space downtown. As he opened the door of his Mercedes, another car came whipping by and ripped the door off. The lawyer was very upset about this, and when the police arrived, he was still ranting and raving about the ruination of his beautiful Mercedes. The officer looked at him and said, "You lawyers are so materialistic. You're so worried about your car that you didn't even notice that your arm was torn off in the accident." The man looks down at the bloody stump that was his arm and says, "My Rolex! Where's my Rolex?" 3 rats were sitting in a bar when they got into an argument over which one was the toughest. The first one said, "Whenever I see a rat trap loaded with cheese, I kick the little lever, slide under the bar, and walk away with the cheese. The second rat says, well, when I run across some rat poison, I just grind it up and put it into my coffee. It gives me strength all day. The third rat is silent for a time, and the other two rats ask him if he has a story to tell. The third rat says, yes, I do, but I don't have time to tell you. I've got a date with a cat. A blonde was speeding in a 35 miles per hour zone when a police officer pulled her over. The officer, who was also a blonde, asked to see her driver's license. The blonde, searching frantically in her purse, finally said to officer, "What does it look like?" The officer answered, "You dummy, it's small and has your picture on it." Finally, at the bottom of her purse, the blonde found a small rectangular mirror. She pulled it out, saw her face reflected in it, and said, "This must be it," handing it to the officer. The blonde officer looked at the mirror and said, "You're free to go. If I'd known you were a fellow police officer, we could have avoided all this hassle." A blonde went to the computer store. She told the clerk that she needed a set of drapes for her computer. The clerk said, "Ma'am, your computer doesn't need drapes." The blonde replied, "Yes, it does. It has windows. Duh!" So little Johnny is sitting in class, and he remembers to himself that he was up way late the night before and was watching the late show. He remembers that there was a joke about red roses, and he didn't get it. So he turned to little Susie and says, "What are red roses?" Susie starts crying, and she runs to the teacher. Teacher stops the class and asks little Susie what was wrong. She told the teacher that little Johnny just asked her what red roses were. Appalled, the teacher demands that little Johnny goes to the principal's office at once. Little Johnny gets to the principal's office, and Mr. Principal asks him why he was sent. Johnny told the principal that he asked little Susie a question, she told the teacher, and the teacher sent her to his office. The principal asked what his question was, and little Johnny told him, "I asked what red roses were." Outraged, the principal sends Johnny home. Johnny gets home and his mother asked why he was out of school. Johnny told her that he asked little Susie a question. She told the teacher sent her to the principal's office, and the principal sent him home. His mother asked what the question was. At this point, little Johnny was reluctant in telling, but he finally said, "I asked what red roses were." His mom shrieked and sent him to his room without supper. Totally confused at this point, he decided to sneak out and ask his neighbor little Tim the question because they were best friends, and Tim would never tell on Johnny. As he was crossing the street, he gets hit by a bus. What's the moral of the story? Look both ways before crossing the street.